Hello, everyone. My name is John Furniss, and I'd like to thank you for all coming today. This is really wonderful. I love it that it's an inclusive event like this because, in my experience, usually when I go to the museum, it's a long, slow, quiet walk. It's, eh, and it's every bit as exciting as it sounds. So it's wonderful to have this opportunity to. I mean, it's kind of surreal. I never really thought. Growing up, I lived in a little town, and I would see art shows like this on TV and movies, and never did I think I would even be at one, let alone be participating in it and even invited to speak. It's kind of a dream, really. And it's wonderful to see you all here. I mean, well, maybe not exactly see you all here, but you get what I'm saying. And I'd like to share with you how I became blind and how I've used art to help me not only cope with that, but really excel in my life. So I became blind at 16. I had been really having some hard times with depression and anxiety, and I attempted suicide when I was 16, and that made me become blind and lose my sense of smell. But those were the only two things I lost, and I really I feel very lucky that I have been able to adapt like I have and been able to maintain all the skills that I have. And one big piece of advice I'll give to any teenager is don't take yourself so seriously. You're really still a kid. You're not an adult just yet, even though you feel like it. And maybe bust out the fingerprints or finger paints and just go to town someday. Feel free to still be a kid. 300 years ago, it would be considered a midlife crisis. Got a little bit more time ahead of us these days. And so this was when I was in high school, of course, and for the first year or so after I became blind, I adapted really quickly, which helped me cope a lot. I changed the rear wheel bearings on my old car, for instance, about a week after I got home from the hospital, because I just remembered it so clearly. I've got such a visual imagination. And I also used drugs to try and cope, and that was the worst decision you could possibly make. And it brought me right back to where I was before. And one thing that did kind of help me through it, though, was sculpture. I loved sculpting with clay, and it kind of gave me time, something to fill the time. Which, when I became blind, I had really bad insomnia, so there was lots of time to fill, and I got back down to a pretty low place, and my folks decided that they didn't have the tools that they needed to help me, and so they took me to a place that was kind of drug rehabilitation and psychiatric help. That's kind of a hard one to say. And that definitely did help a lot. I was able to get clean, and I finished high school, and I made another terrible decision. Well, there again, in high school, one of the classes I still loved was sculpture, or pottery anyway. And when I got out of high school, I made a really terrible decision and went back to the small town I grew up in. And there was really nothing but trouble for me there. I got involved with drugs again, and I got in trouble with the law, and that was not, I ended up even going to jail, which was very scary, but at the same time, it was county jail there in the small town, so most of the people that were in there were at the very least associates, if not friends. So it could have been worse. But I used art to help me through that time too, because I really, the only thing there was for me to do there was to get in trouble, make sculptures with clay, and listen to books on tape. And I ended up getting a really bad sinus infection because I wasn't living in the greatest of places. And I ended up having to have a major surgery in Denver, Colorado. And while I was there, I had gotten some clay and I made a little miniature TV set sculpture for one of the nurses that was really nice. It was one of the really old ones with the rabbit ears, antenna, and the knobs on the front. And she said she brought it home and put it on top of her TV. And she said her boyfriend was not real keen on that, but she said it was going to stay there. And they didn't take care of the infection at that hospital. It came back and it was really bad, and I luckily went to a much better hospital with a lot better doctors and equipment, and they got me fixed up with another major surgery. And after that, I decided I was done in the town I grew up in. Not to mention, I had been robbed by one of my so-called friends while I was in the hospital. They took my stereo and my X-Acto knife set I used for sculpting. And so I decided I am done with this stuff. So I reached out to my parents, who have always been there for me. They've never, ever abandoned me. I distanced myself because I wanted to do the bad things, basically. And so they took me back in, and with their help and my own stubbornness, I was able to get off of meth and to get off of probation. And thank you. I really, it took a lot of effort to do that, for sure. I mean, but it was definitely the best thing that ever could have happened to me. And about the time I was getting off probation and getting off the meth and everything, I had heard of a school for the blind in Salt Lake City. And it wasn't an academic school. It was like a rehabilitation center where you go, people that have become blind go and they learn independent living skills and Braille and computer. They also had a wood shop there. And I decided that even though I thought they were a little bit crazy, I would try it out because I've always been really interested in that kind of a thing. And I found my one thing that people talk about, that I am better at woodworking than anything else I've ever tried. And part of that was the teacher that I had. He ended up actually becoming a very close friend, and when he retired, I basically, since I didn't have a job, I would hang out with him and woodwork. And actually, the table that you see, I built that in his shop, and broke my back twice while I was working on that table. Not related to the table, but I figured I might as well just keep building. So I finished it up in a back brace, but hey, it is what it is. And one problem I've run into as a blind person, I don't have computer skills. I'm a mechanic. I work with my hands. I build things. I fix things, and that has caused me a lot of problems with employment, because most places that you do work with your hands or repair machines or whatever, they don't want to hire a blind person, especially a blind person with a black mark on their criminal history. That just that basically just said, nope, you're not getting a job. And my friend that was teaching me woodworking, or had become my close friend, he had told me about the Emil Fries School of Piano Technology for the Blind that used to be in Vancouver, Washington. It unfortunately closed down a couple of years ago, but it sounded like it was right up my alley, and also seemed like the only job I was going to get was one I made. So I applied to the school, and luckily I was accepted and came up here in 2011. And I put my this kind of woodworking on hiatus while I was doing piano work, but I was still fine-tune woodworking, because rebuilding pianos is a lot of fine-tune woodworking, basically. And it's like making a wooden model, a mechanical wooden model. And I had a lot of fun with that, for sure. And not to mention, I met my wonderful wife at the school. In 2012, I was working over the summer because the school mainly taught tuning and basic repair. And I have to admit, I'm not the greatest tuner. I really wasn't, but I'm a great mechanic. So I was working with the guy that did their major rebuilding, who was getting ready to retire, Rick Patton, and to learn how to fully rebuild new hammers and strings and everything. And Annie was there painting a piano for a fundraiser. And I walk into the workroom that we happen to be sharing, and like an iron bar to a magnet, my hand goes in the wet paint on her piano. It's just how it works when you're blind. And we were both embarrassed. She had never really interacted with blind people, and I thought I had just destroyed her painting. Luckily, she was just priming. And we worked in the same workroom there for a couple of weeks and got talking, and we decided we liked each other a bit. We went on a date at there's a community center in Vancouver where you can rent 20 by 20 foot garden plots. And I had rented one with a friend of mine, and I had a massive patch of peas. It was, call it a hedge of peas, because I didn't do the regular little trellises like normal. I did a twine border about a foot off the ground all around the patch, and then I took twine and weaved it back and forth across that like a spider web. So it just grew into this big mass of peas. And so I had hundreds of peas to pick, and she called me, and I told her, I'm sorry, I'm busy right now, I'll have to call you back. And I really wasn't busy, I was broke. I had no money. And so I'm trying to think of what to do, and I thought, hey, she would love to go on a garden date picking peas with me. And it worked great. And my friends kind of gave me a hard time. They were like, this is like one of those dating videos or shows you see. And, yeah, we went to my garden and picked peas. I thought it was great. And he made me pick peas. What am I, your servant? So luckily it went really well, and we ended up getting married right in front of that same garden plot 3 years later. And so it's been a wonderful journey, and Annie has really been a huge part of my art journey, because I worked rebuilding pianos for a couple of years, and it was really fun when I was first learning it, because it was new and interesting, and it was science and geometry, but I'm a creative person, and I like things that change, and once you learn the ins and outs of pianos, they're all the same 11,000 parts. So I just couldn't see myself doing it anymore, and Annie bought me my lathe for my birthday 4 years ago, and I decided to get back to my roots where I really started. And her mom asked me if I would make her a little dresser top jewelry dish. And I said, of course I would. And I made her this nice, simple little jewelry dish. And Annie posted it on Facebook. And within a day, there were about 14 people that said, hey, I want one of those too. So that's where my professional woodworking career started. And it really, no one would know who I was without Annie. She's not just the love of my life. She's my press secretary. Really, she's the reason that I'm here today, you know. Without her being my biggest fan and getting me out there on social media all the time, which, I mean, if I tried to do all the pictures and stuff, you'd be getting nose hair shots more often than not, you know. It's like, what exactly are you going for there? So I really can't tell you how much she has helped me along my journey and encouraged me so much. And she knows all the people in the art community around here. And in Salt Lake City, there really isn't a large enough community, and it's so insular that there's no possible way I could have found somewhere to sell my art that I could have actually gotten a realistic amount of money for it because of the amount of time that goes into it. So moving up here really was a wonderful, just it allowed me to do what I dreamed of doing. When I finished that table, I remember thinking to myself, man, I wish I could do this for a living. And now I can. It's great. You know, and there's kind of a funny little thing that when I was going to the piano school, part of the curriculum was to go to Toastmasters. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it's an acronym, and I don't remember what it stands for, but it's basically a public speaking group. And there's a handbook that goes with it, and there's different subjects that you do talks on and stuff. And the school thought it would be a good idea for us to do that so that we would be comfortable talking to customers. And honestly, I fought it tooth and nail because I never saw the use in it. I'm a piano technician. Why do I need that? And the funniest part about it is now I don't work on pianos, but I do a lot of public speaking. So you just never know how things are going to turn out. Okay. Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. Well, I'll wrap it up with a few pieces of wisdom I've learned being in the shop. One is be mindful and don't put your finger there, stupid. First bowl I ever made has some of my blood in the wood because I got careless and distracted and had an accident that needed 11 stitches and 8 weeks to heal. I left a trail of blood like a wounded cowboy in a John Wayne movie all the way to the back door. You know, but luckily I learned a valuable lesson. Like I said, mindfulness, keep your mind on where you are and what you're doing, and don't put your finger there, stupid. Number 2, have patience. Patience is so important. I lose things a lot, and anybody else that's blind knows that is infuriating. And I like to say that there's a little gremlin that follows blind people around that likes to kick things when they drop them. And I mean, I know mine has a couple of my tools in his belt that I'd sure like to have back. and it really helps to keep my patience when I'm doing that. And there's a quote from Bruce Lee: patience is not passive, patience is concentrated strength. And number 3, find joy in life, in anything. I can't tell you how many times I've done something I could have gotten real frustrated about, like forgetting the lawnmowers at the bottom of the stairs and, doing some unintended acrobatics over the top of it and usually not sticking the landing. I'll be laying on the ground picturing what that looked like, just laughing like a lunatic. And it helps a lot. And another thing is, if you can't do something one way, you can definitely find another way. Um, there's so many times that I've had to find different ways to do things. And Martin Luther King says, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. And if you can't see, imagine. And I certainly never imagined I would be a blind artist giving a talk in the Portland Art Museum. Let me tell you what, that blows my mind just to say it. And it makes me realize that in a lot of ways I had to lose my sight to really gain my vision. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, of course.
Please raise your hand. Does anyone have any questions? No?
My questions are all about these beautiful
Mhm.
objects. And the effort involved in it. My husband does wood turning.
Oh, cool.
I know, he's here.
Oh, nice. Hello.
He's in the front row.
Real
Oh.
quiet,
But mindful.
Yes.
But it's very interesting to see some of them, you're having to glue parts together.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Which seems to me to add a lot of complexity.
It definitely does. I've got I'm real particular about my glue joints. I've got this big sander I like to call Colonel Sanders, and I use it to flatten out all the pieces real good before I glue them together, and I get covered in sawdust like a powdered donut when I use that thing.
Yeah,
It's,
basically there's sawdust everywhere in our house.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
gets to
and-
shake himself off before he comes inside.
Yeah, definitely. And but I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it. I'm real particular about, like I said, getting it just right and everything.
David?
Yeah, do you worry much about whether people are going to like these or not, or is it like a really
That's a good question.
personal?
Not really. I mean, 'cause I like it. It's one of those things. I actually have a hard time pricing my stuff because I love doing it so much. I undervalue myself. It's like, well, I had a really fun time doing it, so I don't know. I mean,
We have a good system. He
Yeah.
tells me what he thinks the price should be, and I add about $10 or $20 to it.
Yeah.
So, there you go. It's a good system.
yeah,
'Cause
it
he's
works
usually
out.
off, yeah.
But yeah, I don't really worry about it. I mean, and there have been times when there'll be a piece or two that goes through 3 or 4 shows and nobody buys it, and so I'll just give it to somebody. Just be like, here, then whatever. Nobody else seems to love it. Maybe you will.
Yeah.
I've seen some of John's work in a couple of places and really admire it. The thing of it is, the inspiration you get from some of your different contortions of the bowls and what have you is really unique, I think. What do you use for inspiration for that?
Thank you. Well, I have a very vivid visual imagination still, like a CAD program in my mind. And I can just see it right in front of me and change it and twist it and do whatever I really want to with it. And a lot of times I'll let the piece of wood tell me what to do, so to speak, because when you rough it out and you get it round, it's never perfectly round. You've always got some sort of a ridge or a swoop or whatever. There'll be a little bit of a design that's starting to poke out, and so I'll just kind of go with that, and I'll start cutting away, and I've done a lot of stuff with like the inside undercut. That's kind of a signature of mine. I've done a lot of those. Yeah, like this one here, and I've even I wish I'd have remembered to bring one. I designed a smartphone amplifier that has curved over sides like that and a kind of a cone in the middle, and it doubles the volume of your phone.
Yes, I use mine every day.
So maybe this is personal or.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
Just
Yeah.
the other question.
But, so, I mean, you studied the piano tuning and
Uh-huh.
piano repair, and were you frightened? I mean, obviously you had a steady income doing that, pretty steady, you know, because a lot of people need piano repair. How did you get the, self-assuredness to say, hey, I really love this woodworking and I can make, enough money to make a living at it?
Well, it definitely took some courage. I got a lot of inspiration from Annie, for sure, and I had benefits also, and the interesting thing about it, rebuilding pianos is kind of patchy because rebuilding a piano is as expensive as rebuilding a car. Like, for instance, if you're getting new strings and new hammers, and generally a piano that old needs 2 or 3 other things, that's about $7,000 worth of work in the average market. And that's even the low end. That's cheap. So it was hard to get business because you can buy a really nice piano for $7,000. But the woodworking has actually been steadier because though it would be large paydays, it was also months to do the work. I mean, new hammers and strings and those, 3 or 4 other things, that's like 2 months worth of work. And so you're not getting it all at once. And it kind of balanced out. And like I said, I got to where I dreaded going to work because it was just the same thing in and out and just all around. There was nothing different. The only things that were ever different were things that manufacturers did that I don't know why they did it, but it made my job harder. That's basically what it broke down to. That was the only new thing you ever ran into. So I remember the piano that took me over the edge. The piano. Oh, yes, I remember the piano. A Fisher Grand, 1949 Fisher Grand. Someone had poured epoxy all around the tuning pins because they were so worn out they wouldn't hold a tune, and then sprayed gold flake paint over everything to cover it up. So I spent a week sanding the plate to get it ready to repaint by hand. And then we had to do strings, and then whoever had done the epoxy thing had apparently gone on the internet and tried to look up how to do some repairs because there were several things on there that we could tell someone that didn't know what they were doing had tried to repair it. So that made my job 10 times harder. Not to mention, we didn't know what we were getting into, so we underbid the job by probably $3,000. So by the end of that one, I was like, I will take this thing out in the parking lot and burn it for all I care. So that's kind of how I came around that journey.
Do you only turn on a lathe, or do you do other carving, or
Well,
lathe your only instrument?
Well, I've thought about doing some hand carving, like relief carving, but I just haven't really had the time. And then otherwise, lathe work is my favorite. So it's not necessarily the only thing I can use, but it's the only thing I've been wanting to use. I'm actually very skilled with the table saw and cabinetry and joinery and those kind of things. But a bowl it's more instant gratification. Even when you have to glue something, you only have to wait one day, and it doesn't have to be laser precise. I mean, it just has to be close because it's just a rough block of wood that you're going to be carving most of it away to turn it into a bowl. And so you start out with a rough block of wood that morning, and that evening you have a beautiful finished bowl.
I carve spoons, so I'm very familiar with
Nice.
instant gratification.
Yeah. That's something I've been wanting to try is carving spoons. I recently used my big sander to shape some wooden spatulas that turned out really nice.
Well, we should talk.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Anyone?
Anybody else? I have a question. John,
Uh-huh.
have you done any more furniture pieces aside from that lovely table that sits in your living room?
I have actually. I've made two other tables, fairly simple end tables that their design was Purple Heart and Paduke, and there's a rectangle in the center with a 2-inch strip of Paduke, rectangle yellow heart in the center, 6 by 12, with a 2-inch strip of Paduke around that, Purple Heart around that, and then a 1-inch strip of Paduke and Purple Heart, and then some simple legs and a skirt. I did a set of 2 of those, and then I did a set of lamps that are actually a very similar design to the table. They're kind of what inspired the table, because I made the lamps for my mom, and for years everything I made was for everybody else, and I decided I'm making something for me, and I liked that design, and so I stuck with it. And, I made a nice rifle box, some pistol handles, and several jewelry boxes. So
Were those commissioned work or just something that you did on your own?
just something I did on my own, just kind of fun stuff. I've only been professionally woodworking for about 4 years. You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. This has been wonderful.